we will start. I'd like to begin as usual by welcoming all of you this morning, evening, afternoon, whatever time it is for you, wherever you are. And as usual, we will begin with the prayers for refuge and bodhicitta. So I'd like to ask you to please recite these prayers with great faith and devotion. O Sanje Chedan Sogi Chonam La Chancho Bardo Dani Chapsum Je Dagi Chenyen Yibe Sunam Yirola Penjir Sanje Robar Sho Sanje Chedang Sogi Chonam La Chancho Bardo Dani Chapsum Je Dagi Chenyen Yibe Sunam Yirola Penjir Sanje Robar Sho Sanje Chedan Sogi Chonam La Chancho Bardo Dani Chapsum Je Dagi Chenyen Yibe Sunam Yirola Penjir Sanje Robar Jo until enlightenment I go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and the sublime Sangha. By the merit of my listening to the Dharma, may I reach Buddhahood to benefit beings. Until enlightenment I go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and the sublime Sangha. By the merit of my listening to the Dharma, may I be reach Buddhahood to benefit beings. Until enlightenment I go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and the sublime Sangha. By the merit of my listening to the Dharma, may I reach Buddhahood to benefit beings. Simjin Tamje Dewa Dan Dewe Judan Dambar Jurje Donga Dan Donga Ji Judan Dawar Jurje Donga Mebe Dewa Tamba Tam Mindrawa Jurje Nyerin Shadan Nitan Dawe Danyon Shembola Nebar Jurje. May all sentient beings be happy and have the causes of happiness. May they be free of suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be parted from the highest joy, which is free of suffering. May they dwell in the great equanimity, free of attachment or hatred for those near or far. In the Dharma Expanse Palace of Akanishta is the essence of all Buddhas of the three times who show me directly my mind is Dharmakaya. I prostrate to the glorious exalted Gurus. Please bless me and all sentient beings that our minds become the Dharma. Please bless us that the Dharma become the path. Please bless us that the path dispel confusion. Please bless us that confusion arise as wisdom. So now please think to yourselves that we need to bring all of our mothers, all sentient beings who are as limitless as space, to the state of completely perfect Buddhahood. And in order to do that, we need to meditate. In order to meditate, we need to have understanding, which comes from listening and contemplating. So this morning, please think to yourselves that you are engaging in listening with that purpose. Of course, once you've listened, as you have been for the last month and a half. That on itself is excellent, but it's not enough, unfortunately. We also have to contemplate. And contemplating the teachings. And then the meditation, of course, we follow the instructions we're given by whichever tradition we engage in our meditation. Many of you are probably follow the Tibetan tradition, but you follow the even in the Tibetan tradition, there are differences. So you follow the instructions of your teachers and guides and so forth. So, and also the other thing is, it's possible that there are some people who watch these teachings on YouTube who kind of think to themselves, well, those beginning prayers and dedications take a lot of time. I'm going to skip them. Fast forward. I suppose it's your prerogative, but you should make sure not to, what do we say? It's a question as to whether that's actually going to be beneficial for you. Because what's really most important when we listen to teachings, actually when we do anything, is our motivation. And so the reason why we recite prayers at the beginning is to remind us to have a good motivation. I mean, you could listen and you could memorize all of Abhidharma, but if your motivation is not a good motivation, it's not in the end going to do you much good. It might help you, it won't even help you fill in crossword puzzles. I mean, what good is it going to, if you don't have the right motivation, that's just not going to do you any real lasting benefit at all to just fill up your mind with more information. But if you have the right motivation, the motivation of wanting to do something to really achieve happiness now in this lifetime, to achieve liberation from samsara, or to bring all sentient beings from liberation, whether it's any of those are good motivations. Of course, on the Tibetan scale, we rate them on a grading scale of lesser to greater. But it's important to have that idea that this is part of the process. So it's not about learning something outside of ourselves. It's really about learning more about how our minds work, so that we can then have a better understanding of how to move forward to achieve true freedom. Freedom from not just the cares of this life, but from actually the sufferings and the terrors of this life and any other existence that we might find ourselves falling into. So it's really important for us to have a good motivation as we listen to the Dharma. And the Dharma that we are listening to is the Treasury of Abhidharma by Vasubandhu, as explained by the 9th Karmapa Wangchuk Dorje in his commentary, Youthful Play. Of the 8 chapters of the Treasury of Abhidharma, we are discussing the 8th area, Teachings on Wisdom. And there is, of course, the 8th area includes the actual text of the area and then a conclusion to the entire treatise. And so we're speaking about the actual text of the area, talking about the absorptions. Did I say teachings on wisdom? I should have said teachings on absorption. Teachings on absorptions. So this has 3 main sections: the explanation of absorptions, of the jhanas and the formless, and then the classifications of samadhi, and then the explanation of the qualities supported by samadhi. So we have already been through the first topic, and yesterday we began the second topic, the classifications of samadhi, which has the classifications into 3 and the classifications into 4. So we went through the classifications into 3 yesterday, and so today we will discuss the classifying samadhi in 4, which begins on page 567 of the book. But we had a few questions overnight. Questions and comments. One of them is about, it's not directly related to this, but kind of taking off on a comment that I made the other day that, or in one of the earlier classes, about people often getting into conflict over the tunes that we say in Dharma centers. I just use that as an example of one thing that people get upset about. And the questioner had the suggestion that we write the tunes in Western musical notation. Actually, for the Kaju Munlam, I wrote several of the Kaju Munlam tunes down in Western musical notation. But I haven't done that with all the tunes, certainly for a lot of the pujas. And there are a couple of problems with writing down the tunes. The first is, for someone such as myself, what am I going to spend the little time I have? Am I going to spend it on writing down musical tunes, or am I going to spend it on more translation and other things? And I usually end up picking the latter. The other problem is actually that there are many different tunes that can be used. In the Kaji tradition, we sing the short Vajradhara prayer, the one that begins Vajradhara, great Vajradhara, and so forth. It's sung in it's done in many different translations. In Tibetan, of course, you do it in Tibetan, and in Tibetan I have heard it done with at least 5 different, maybe 6 different melodies, 5 or 6 different melodies, and in fact, there's a whole raft of different melodies you can use. Even with some of the different melodies, there are so many different variations on the melodies, and to say one is right and one is not. So I think that actually the point of what I was saying when I was speaking about that is that, of course, it would be possible to write everything down and make it standardized. But the most important thing for all of us as people is to be able to put up with it when things are different than what we expect. It's to look at your own qualities, look at yourself. Look inside yourself and see what is really going on inside yourself. For teaching people melodies, the musical notation is good. But even if you have the musical notation, people are going to sing it differently. And that's just how it goes. And so we have to develop patience, in other words. Patience when things don't go exactly how we want. Now, the second set of questions is a set of questions that's not directly related to our topic, but since many of you don't often have chances to get this sort of question answered, I'm happy to do my best. If I can add any clarity, that's good. If I can't do any clarity, I'm sorry about that. So the question reads, one second. Can you explain the difference between, there are 3 parts. Can you explain the difference between emotional and cognitive obscurations? Can you explain the difference between obscurations and defilements? And also, I don't understand the difference between grasping at a personal ego or self and grasping at a self of phenomena. So these are 3 questions. And so these are questions that don't come up, well, the second kind of does in the Abhidharma. But the first and the third don't really come up in the Treasury of Abhidharma because it's teaching on the level of the great exposition. So in the Treasury of Abhidharma, we don't really see any distinction between causal, emotional, or cognitive obscurations, not in the same way as is described in the Mahayana. So when we talk in the Mahayana, when we talk about here the questioner says emotional obscurations, I usually translate it as afflictive obscurations. Emotions aren't the problem. If you think about what are the afflictions that we have problems with, they're the kernels that we discussed in the fifth area. And at least half of those are not emotions. Delusion is not an emotion. Even many instances of anger are not actually emotions. They don't rise to that level. The instances of malice often do not rise to the level of an emotion. So you have to be careful. We're not actually talking about emotions. Emotions aren't the problem. The problem is the afflictions. These specific kernels, whether you classify them in 5, 10, or 98. 5, 6, 10, or 98. Or 120, or 400. Anyways, but the difference between the afflictive obscurations and the cognitive obscurations is that the afflictive obscurations in the Mahayana refer to the kernels and also to their imprints. So often people translate that same term I translate as imprint as habitual tendencies. But so there are the afflictions and also the imprints of the afflictions, some of the imprints of the afflictions. And then there are the cognitive obscurations. These are primarily dualistic thinking, habits of dualistic thinking and perception, not just thinking, perception too. Seeing a separation between self and other, seeing a separation between the perceiver and the perceived. So that is what we mean by the cognitive obscurations there, that dualistic cognition. So that's the first question in brief. And of course, this is described in much more detail in Mahayana texts. Now, the difference between obscurations and defilements is that basically defilements are all obscurations. Defilements means it's a synonym for the afflictions. So when we say defilements, it's a synonym for afflictions. And with the defilements, the difference between a defilement and obscuration is that all defilements are obscurations, but not all obscurations are defilements. For example, we have the what do we say? We have the obscurations of absorption. And so in the Abhidharma and in the Mahayana, we also talk about cognitive obscurations. So there are obscurations that are not necessarily defilements. So they're like the obscurations. So of course, the cognitive obscurations and also the obscurations to absorptions. So basically, defilements and obscurations. Defilements are a subset of obscurations. And then the difference between grasping at a personal ego or self and grasping at a self of phenomena. So here, this is an interesting one. And this, again, does not particularly come up in the Abhidharma of the Great Exposition, because the primary concern there is achieving the state of Arhat, and you don't need to worry about the selflessness of phenomena. So, but the basic difference is that the grasping at a personal self, the idea of a me, is that when you look at when you observe the five aggregates, then you think that there is a me, either part of them or separate from them. You think that there's a real me. That's primarily what we're talking about. Then when you're talking about grasping at the self of phenomena, it is thinking that the assemblies of various constituents, or that even actually, let's put it this way. So that's primarily focused with a me, thinking about a me. With the grasping at a self of phenomena, it's thinking that relative phenomena, external phenomena, are true as they appear, and that their constituent elements, if they're material, then the atoms of form that comprise them are also real and not empty, that they have some real substantial existence. And so it's thinking that also the the individual moments of mind and the individual, if you also grasping at the mind and the moments of consciousness and mental factors as being real, is also grasping at phenomena. Because when you're grasping at those and you see the mind and mental factors, you're not seeing them as me, but you're still grasping at them as being existent. So that's the difference. So one is kind of looking at primarily looking at the me that we project based upon the five aggregates. And the other is looking at the nature of the five aggregates in general, not just our own, but in general. So that's that. Now, this next question is regarding the three gates of liberation, or the three Samadhis. So they are the Samadhis when they're defiled, and gates of liberation when they're undefiled. Are they connected to what is known as the three Samadhis in the Dzogchen tradition, viewed from a different perspective, with a different flavor than presented in the Abhidharma? Actually, I'm so parochial. I'm just totally, I study the Karma Kagyu. I have great appreciation for the Dzogchen and other traditions, but I can't claim to be well educated in them at all. I've studied sutra texts and I've studied Karma Kagyu texts, and I just haven't really known enough to talk about it in terms of Dzogchen. But my initial reaction is that they're probably quite different, because of the way that there's the focus on, again, it's a focus of, you have a meditator focusing on some of the different aspects of the 16 Noble Truths. So I think that some of the 16 aspects of the Four Noble Truths. So I think they're really quite different. So those are the main questions. There is also another request for recordings, and I have to admit that I'm a little bit at a loss for what to do on how to share the recordings of the first year of teachings. They take up a lot of space to share on the web, more space than I have on things that I have, and also leaving them permanently. I could make up space for it temporarily, but leaving them up permanently, and because people are going to be watching these, maybe watching these, maybe they won't be, maybe these will fade into obscurity, but people may be watching these recordings for any, for a long period of time to come. To do something that's partial is only, it's temporary, is only a partial solution. And I've been busy enough with other things in addition to this class that I haven't had time to arrange something. So my apologies on that one. Okay, so where are we? And I see that I didn't open up the right file for the book yet. So let me get that open. Ah, yes, there we are. So now now that I've got the file open, I have to share it with all of you. And so we were talking about the classifying samadhi in 4. And so here, the classifying samadhi in 4, basically what we're saying is there are 4 different types of samadhi that the Buddha noted in particular. And so these 4 different, it says here in the text, first jhana's virtue is meditation on samadhi, which is happiness. Clairvoyance of eye is that which sees. Produced by training is discernment. The Vajra-like of the last jhana extinguishes all the defilements. So here we're talking about 4 different samadhis. We're talking about the samadhi of the first jhana. That's the first one. Then we're talking about the clairvoyance of eye. This is the divine eye that sees, and it's clarified here in the text, it sees both present phenomena at greater distances than we can see, or that are obscured, that it obscures, what is that? Let me start again. The divine eye sees both past and future lives and visible forms that are too far away or that are blocked by something. So it includes both of these aspects of clairvoyance. So that's the second, the clairvoyance of eye. Then produced by training is discernment. So this is like doing the various different types of meditations we've spoken about, starting with the repulsivist meditation and also the other different types of meditation. Then that creates great discernment, great understanding that comes from discerning phenomena. That's the third. And then the last one is the Vajra-like is the last jhana. The Vajra-like of the last jhana extinguishes all the defilements. And so this is when you are on the 4th jhana and you develop the Vajra-like samadhi through which you then achieve the level of arhatship. That's the 4th. So these are the 4. The first jhana, which brings dwelling in happiness in the visible. The clairvoyance of eye, which allows you to see. Produced by training, which increases your prajna. And then the Vajra-like samadhi on the 4th dhyana that extinguishes all the defilements. So these are the 4. Now, the reason why we're speaking about these 4 is, as discussed here, the Bhagavan said, there are 4 meditations on samadhi. If you always remain in meditation on samadhi and do this many times, you will also dwell in happiness in the visible. That means in this lifetime. Also, the sutra continues to paraphrase. It continues to say that there are also the divine eye allows you to see past and future lives and so forth. And then you have those produced by meditation, which produced discernment, and then you have the Vajra-like samadhi, which liberates you. So of these 4 samadhis, the first one is the first jhana's virtue. That means virtuous first jhanas, either pure or undefiled. So the pure means a defiled virtue, and the undefiled, of course, is also virtue. So those are included here. Is the meditation on samadhi, which is dwelling in happiness in the visible. In the visible is a term that means in this lifetime, right? So when you have achieved the 4th jhana, and again, as it says in the sutra, if you do it continually, then you dwell in happiness in the virtue. The other jhanas are also known to be the same. The other jhanas also lead to dwelling in happiness in the visible. Although, of course, if you're on the if you're on the fourth jhana, do you dwell in happiness if you don't have if you don't have any happiness? This is an interesting question not addressed in the commentaries. At any rate, looking at it from the outside, it probably seems like happiness. And this happiness in the visible, and the reason for this is given in the next sentence. There is no certainty of dwelling in happiness in future lifetimes. So just because you have the samadhis now, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to dwell in happiness in future lifetimes. And there are three reasons for that. The first one is that it's possible to regress. And if you regress in this lifetime, then of course in this lifetime you're no longer dwelling in happiness in the visible, and you won't be reborn in the form or formless realm, the form realms in the future lifetime. So that's the first reason. And the second is that there are those who are reborn in higher realms. So if you're reborn in like the fourth jhana and higher, then you're not dwelling in happiness because you have neutral feeling. There's no feeling of, it's in a sense, there's a feeling of ease, but it's different than a feeling of pleasure. So there's a neutral feeling there. It's not dwelling in happiness. And the last reason is that you can achieve the first jhana here and then pass into complete nirvana. And then you're not dwelling in anything. Well, maybe you are, but so if you are in that, you don't have the happiness of the first jhana. So that is the question. There's the happiness, and happiness here in the first jhana, it's talking about the faculty of happiness, which generally means the comfort of body. So that's the first one. And then the second one, the second of the samadhis, is the clairvoyance of divine eye that knows death and rebirth, and the knowing concurrent with mind consciousness that arises after that are proposed as the samadhi which knows and sees. So what this means is that you have the divine eye. You see past and future lives. Now, when you're seeing the past and future lives, in the next moment, you know them. You see something and then you know it. Like, for example, you see a person from far off and then you recognize them in the next instant. First, you have the visual thing and then you have the recognition. So the knowing is like in the second instant. So here, the knowing is kind of the primary thing, but is what's important to know is to know what's going on, but it comes from the cause of seeing with the divine eye. So therefore, the samadhi is called by the name of the divine eye. This is the samadhi that knows and sees. Basically, it sees what is going to happen and gives you an understanding of things such as karma, cause, and effect, and so forth. So then the next are is the third, the qualities produced by training. So the defiled or undefiled qualities of the three realms that are produced by training. In everything undefiled are meditation on the samadhi of discernment or full knowing of prajna. Discernment is the characteristic of prajna. Prajna means that you can discern. It's like the discernment of what is dharma and what is not dharma. So you develop this through the different meditations of the three realms that are produced by training. So this would mean things such as the meditation on the repulsive in the desire realm. Or on the four immeasurables that we'll be speaking about soon, or the various other samadhis on the level of form and on the level of formless as well. So that's why it says the defiled or undefiled qualities of the three realms. And so this also, of course, includes the qualities that come from the, that come from the undefiled paths as well. So that's the third, the discernment of full knowing. And then the fourth is the Vajra-like samadhi. The Vajra-like samadhi that has the support of the last, that is the fourth jhana, is samadhi meditation that extinguishes all the defilements. So this is the fourth type of samadhi. And this Vajra-like samadhi is, of course, very important. This is the samadhi that you go through at that last moment that eliminates the most subtle of subtle afflictions or obscurations. And so that is here it's said to be when it happens on the fourth jhana. Now, the reason why these four are taught is because they're kind of like reminding us of stories or events from the Bhagavan Buddha's life. So that's why it says in the next paragraph, thus these four samadhis are taught, just as the Bhagavan himself manifested them in the past. So that's basically saying the reason they're taught is because they remind us of events from the life of the Buddha. At the very first, he produced dhyana in the shade of a rose apple tree. Now, I think this is probably the story that is least well known, so I might as well tell it. I'm not going to go to a whole lot of detail in it. This is before the Buddha, before the Bodhisattva, I should say. We're talking on the great level, on the great exposition. So there is the Bodhisattva Siddhartha Gautama, who was a prince in Kapilavastu. And after he had already become an adult, but before he left his home, this is actually kind of earlier. He was probably I don't know exactly how old he was. I'm not going to speculate, but it was before he left, after he was already old enough. He one day went out from the palace to go sort of survey the land and see what was happening around. I think he led a very cloistered lifestyle, or very secluded. Usually we think of monks in a cloistered lifestyle, but I don't think that the Buddha's existence was quite like that. But he was very confined. He didn't go out much. The Bhagavan did not have the Bodhisattva did not have much opportunity to leave the palace. So one day he did. And when he went out, he looked and he saw all the farmers farming, and he saw what horrible work they were doing under the hot sun in that area of what is in present day Nepal. It gets very hot in the summer, and there are these people who are out from morning, from dawn till dusk, farming in the fields. And he asked them, well, why are you working in the fields? Well, they're saying, well, we have to work so that we can eat, and then we have to pay taxes to the king. There's King Shuddhadana and then Prince Siddhartha Gautama. We have to pay taxes and all this. They kind of own us. We don't have any choice but to do this. And so the Bhagavan said, oh, I'm Prince Siddhartha, so I'm going to let you free. You all are freed from your obligations. You can all go. And then he went to a rose apple tree, a jambu. The word in Sanskrit is jambu. And so he sat underneath a jambu tree. And he sat there in the morning underneath the shade of this tree. And because of he'd had no exposure to meditation before this, but because of the great amounts of merit that he had already gathered over 3 uncountable eons, he just naturally entered the first samadhi, or the first jhana. So he's sitting there in the first jhana, and he sat there all day. But, usually when you're sitting in the shade of a tree, you have to get up and move so every once in a while to stay in the shade as the shade goes from one place to another. But on this day, the shade of the tree kept on staying right over the Bhagavan. I mean, even though the sun moved, the shade stayed right where he was. So they went out looking for him and didn't find. They looked, and then they finally found him in the evening, still sitting in the shade. So that is a reference of why they're particularly bringing out the first jhana here, because that is when the Buddha first achieved the first jhana. Then later, so after that, a while after that, he left the palace, and then he studied with teachers, and then did 6 years of austerities on the bank of the Nirnjana River. And then he finally sat beneath the Bodhi tree on the eve of the full moon of the Vesak month. And he sat beneath the Bodhi tree, and just after taming the Maras, he saw with the divine eye the miserable births and deaths of sentient beings. So this is the divine eye as the samadhi that knows and sees. So he sat there. He overcame the Maras, and I think many of you already know the story. So it's not necessary to go through that again. And he saw the miserable births and deaths of sentient beings. So then, in order to give them refuge, he produced the dhyanas, emancipations, and so forth during the night session. So that seeing with a divine eye happened in the evening. And then through the night, he went through all the dhyanas, all of the emancipations, which we will discuss soon, shortly, and so forth during the night session. Then at dawn, on the basis of the fourth samadhi, or the fourth dhyana, he manifested the paths up to the Vajra-like samadhi, the Great Exposition says. So here, the reason why it's saying that the great exposition says this is actually kind of a common explanation for the foundation vehicle. If you're looking at it from the perspective of the great vehicle, the story is explained differently. So that is the 4 types of samadhi. So now we're finished speaking about the, what do we say, the classifications of the samadhis, and we've come to the 3rd main topic of the actual text of the chapter, the explanation of the qualities supported by samadhi. And so this has 2 topics, teaching the immeasurables, and the second is teaching the other qualities. So to start with teaching the immeasurables, we have again 2 topics, the classifications and the distinguishing features. So the classifications has 3 points, and the first is the actual classification. The immeasurables are 4. And so here it says, giving an explanation of the reason why it's called immeasurable. As they focus on immeasurable sentient beings and have immeasurable merit, they're called immeasurables. So this is immeasurable loving kindness, immeasurable compassion, immeasurable joy, and immeasurable equanimity, these 4. So these are very important qualities, very important meditations in all of the schools of Buddhism. They're one of the fundamental things that are really anything that you meditate from, any meditation practice you do, or any school that you're practicing on, we all talk about the 4 immeasurables. So of course, sometimes we use different translations of the term. Often these are called the 4 limitless qualities, which is also a reasonable translation. It seems to me that immeasurables is slightly more common. Maybe that's just my limited exposure to different translations, but that's the reason why I chose it. So that 4 chose that translation. So in focusing on immeasurable sentient beings, they are 4. They're loving kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity. So it's basically having loving kindness for immeasurable sentient beings, or compassion, or joy. Now, joy here, sometimes people translate it as sympathetic joy. The actual word is just joy itself, but it means having wishing that other people have joy, as we'll go through in just a moment. And then equanimity, the wishing that all beings have equal wishes for all, seeing all sentient beings as equal. And so establishing their quantity. So why are there 4? It's because they're antidotes for malice, etc. So you might wonder, why are there 4 immeasurables and not 6, and not 3? Why is it 4? It's because they're antidotes for excessive malice and so forth, including hostility, dislike, and the attachment of the desire realm. So their number is established as 4. So they're specific antidotes. So loving kindness is the antidote for malice. So malice means like just kind of a wish to harm. Then you have hostility, which is feelings of hostility for sentient beings. And compassion is the antidote for that. And then dislike is in particular dislike when other sentient beings have happiness. So displeasure. And then the attachment of the desire realm. The attachment of the desire realm, actually in particular, what we're speaking about here is when you when you view different people with different levels of affection. For example, feeling easily, and this is natural for all of us. This is why you have to train in the 4 immeasurables. When you feel great love for those who are close to you and dislike for those who are not. That's not equal. So wanting people to have equal amounts of happiness, wanting them to have equally free of suffering, no matter who they are. So that's what we're speaking about in particular with the attachments of the desire. Other schools say that actually this is also an antidote for sexual desire. But then the question is, when you're talking about in that terms, of the attachment, if you're talking about as including sexual desire, then what's the difference between it and repulsiveness meditation? And there are different positions on this, but the position that Vasubandhu presents as his own in the auto commentary is that the repulsiveness meditation is primarily for the sexual and that sort of desire, and the meditation on equanimity is primarily for attachment to people and friends and so forth who are close to you, to the point where you're excluding other people. Because that's what happens when you only have attachment for yourself or for people around you. Then you actually automatically kind of have aversion for those who are distant or who you perceive as threats and so forth. And so that's the importance of equanimity. Now, often there are really a lot of wonderful teachings on these four immeasurables that are available these days. And we also have a lot of teachings available on them from the Theravada tradition. One of the most well-known, at least in English, is Sharon Salzberg's book, Loving Kindness, The Revolutionary Art of Happiness. It's a very interesting, very good book. But in that book and in other Theravada texts I've seen online that are in English, now it might actually be different when you have them written in Pali or in Burmese or in Thai or whatever language, because the things always get tailored to the English audience. But often what it's described as in the text, Theravada text I've seen, is that equanimity is the quality of not expecting that you're going to actually be able to change any being's karma. You wish that sentient beings be happy, but if they don't end up happy, you recognize that is not something you can do something about. So this is on the Theravada tradition. It's not your fault if other people aren't happy. It's their own karma. So for this reason, it's a little bit different. So this explanation here, though, is on the level of the Great Exposition, saying that here in this context, equanimity is having the same feelings of equanimity towards not favoring any sentient being over the other. In the Tibetan tradition, this is more often talked about as not having any bias. Like when we speak about this in terms of many of the Tibetan teachings on loving kindness, that is the way they describe it. Similarly, when we're talking about the joy, which is the antidote for dislike or displeasure, that in the Tibetan tradition, we often talk about that as an antidote for envy. So envy comes out of your dislike or pleasure. You're displeased when you see something, then you're envious. So that is kind of a little bit of a distinction. So in other words, the point here is that there are slightly different explanations of these four immeasurables in all of the different traditions. And because we are in a position where we can get the teachings from all of the different traditions, well, we need to recognize these differences. But we also have to realize that all of them have something we can really learn from. It's not like one is better, one is worse. It's like they're different traditions that are taught with slightly different purposes and slightly different understandings. But in the end, they all produce immeasurable merit. They all are focusing on immeasurable sentient beings. They're all immeasurable. So just different ways of presenting it. Not one good, one bad. It's like saying they're all have different things to teach us. So those are the four: the immeasurable loving kindness, immeasurable, immeasurable loving kindness, immeasurable compassion, immeasurable joy, and immeasurable equanimity. And so what is the essence of each of these? The essence of each of them, the essence of each classification is described next. It says, love and compassion are non-hatred, and joy is pleasure of the mind, and equanimity is non-greed. So non-hatred. Non-hatred is a mental factor that is basically the opposite of hatred. So hatred is seeing an object, which could be a person, and then feeling aversion and like you want to get rid of it. This is the absence of that. There's a mental factor that is that quality of not having hatred. It's called non-hatred. It's one of the virtuous mental factors. So both loving kindness and compassion are by essence, in their essence, they are this non-hatred. Then joy is pleasure of the mind, some mental pleasure. We've spoken a lot about mental pleasure. It's not physical pleasure, it's mental pleasure. Then equanimity is non-greed because it's the opposite of attachment. Remember that it's the antidote for the attachment of the desire realm, so it is non-attachment, non-greed. So love and compassion are the virtue of non-hatred, and joy is pleasure of the mind at others' happiness. So you see other people being happy, and that instead of being displeased, you are happy, joyful about it. That's joy of the mind. And equanimity is the virtue of non-greed. Um, so those are the essences of the four. Therefore, they are antidotes for the malice preceded by greed and so forth. So when you have greed, and that leads to malice, because they're in essence, they're non-hatred and non-greed and so forth, then they're antidotes for that sort of malice. Alternatively, the master explains that they are non-greed and non-hatred both. So they are suitable as antidotes for both greed and hatred. So how does that work? Well, actually what it is that any time you have non-hatred, you also have non-greed. These are two mental factors that always go together. So when you say that, like loving kindness is non-hatred and equanimity is non-greed, well, actually, they're both happening at the same time. Now, there might be different weights and different strengths of one or the other, but because they are both are present together, these meditations on the four can all be suitable as antidotes for both hatred and greed. So distinguishing the features, so there are different, so now we've talked about the essence, so you have to talk about what are the different features of each of them. There are 6 topics here: the distinctions of aspects, meaning how they see things, the distinctions of the object, the distinctions in levels, which levels of samadhi are they on or not on, and distinctions in how they function as antidotes for the levels, and the distinctions in support, and the distinctions in how they are possessed. So the first is the distinction of aspects. And so so this here, because the distinctions of aspects are here thinking. Their aspects are thinking, may they be happy, not suffer, joyous, and sentient beings. So you're thinking about 4 things. You're looking at sentient beings and thinking, may they be happy, may they not suffer, may they, and thinking about they have joy, and then thinking about sentient beings all equally. So these are the 4 aspects of the four immeasurables. And so their aspects are thus. The aspect of love is thinking, oh, may they, sentient beings, be happy. In other words, when you're doing the meditation on this, you start out with one sentient being who is like close to you. Often we say your mother, but whoever's close to you, you feel like the closest of close to you. Probably better not a partner, not a romantic partner is better, but someone who's close to you. You think, oh, may they be happy. And then you bring this out, you expand the meditation out until you can think of it for all immeasurable or limitless sentient beings. May they, all sentient beings, be happy. So you're meditating, may they be happy. Now, there are different meditations that give different texts that you recite, but in general, the basic point is that you're wishing that they all be happy. The aspect of compassion is thinking, may they not suffer. So this is looking at sentient beings and thinking about the sufferings that either they are or will experience or could experience, and thinking, may they not suffer. So it's a little bit different in the focus. So the happiness is just, you're just thinking about the sentient beings and wanting them to be happy. Wanting them to be free of suffering is kind of like similar, but it's a little bit different in its aspect. So it's really thinking about the sufferings that sentient beings experience and wishing that they be free of those sufferings. So this gives us what actually are the kind of characteristics of loving kindness. The characteristic of loving kindness is the wish that other sentient beings be happy. And then the characteristic of compassion is that it's the wish that other sentient beings be free of suffering. So then we have the aspect of joy. And so again, joy here is a specific type of joy. It's not just any sort of joy. The aspect of joy of here, limitless joy or immeasurable joy, is thinking, may they have joyous minds. May they just have joy. So this is happiness. May they be happy is like kind of focusing. Happiness is generally talking about comfort, ease, physical pleasure, good health, and so forth. Joyous minds is like, may they be happy. When they have something good, it's wanting them to enjoy it, and also rejoicing in it yourself. The aspect of equanimity is thinking without attachment to those near, or without attachment to those near or a hatred for the distant, I will treat all sentient beings equally. So just as you have loving kindness or compassion for any one sentient being, you may also have that for any other sentient being. So treating all sentient beings equally. So one reflects with such an intention and enters absorption. So you have that sort of you set that sort of intention, and then you begin the absorption. And as a beginner stage, what you do is you think to yourselves, if you're meditating on loving kindness, oh, may they sentient beings be happy. As it says here, one rests in the middle without any prejudice and without any attachment or animosity either. So basically, the training, as is described in the auto commentary. So in the auto commentary, hang on a second. What does it say? I got to get that visible for me. It's not going to help you all to see it, most of you. Oh, yeah. So it's basically thinking, all right, that's described at a different point. The actual meditation is described at a slightly later point in the auto commentary. So I'm going to hang off on talking about that in the auto commentary in the self, but basically until it's at the point where the auto commentary speaks about it. So basically it's meditating, may all sentient beings be happy, may they be free of suffering, may they have great joy, may I see all sentient beings as equal. Those are the meditations in general. Now, so what is the distinction? Is the object, their sphere is beings of desire. So they are meditating on happiness and so forth for ordinary or for sentient beings in the realm of desire. So the question here is, what do they focus on when they meditate with these aspects, you ask? Their focus or sphere is sentient beings of desire, because the immeasurables are the antidote for the malice and so forth that focus on beings of the desire realm. So so they're the antidote for these, for the malice and so forth. And because they're thinking about that in the desire realm, then the beings you're thinking about are in the desire realm. And then there's the distinctions in the levels. And the levels here means which level of dhyana and so forth are on. On the 2 dhyanas, there is joy, others on 6. So of the 4, there can only be joy on a level where you can actually experience joy, which means that it can be the 1st or the 2nd dhyana, not the 3rd and not the 4th. So on the first 2 dhyanas, you can have joy. But the others, the immeasurable loving kindness, immeasurable compassion, and immeasurable equanimity, can happen on any of the 6 levels of dhyana. How many levels are they on, you ask? On the first 2 dhyanas, there is joy because it is produced by meditation and is mental pleasure. The other 3 immeasurables are on 6 levels, the 4 dhyanas and special dhyana, and not unable. So these are the 6 levels of dhyana that we always speak about, those 6. But other people say that actually they're on 5. So as it says here, others' assertions, some they say on 5. Some say that they're on 5, excluding not enabled. They're not enabled because it's a preparation. You can't do it there, they say. Others say that they are on 10. And when you say 10, you're including the desire realm and all 4 preparations. So you've got the 4 dhyanas, plus the special dhyana, that's 5. Then the desire realm, that's 6. And then the preparations for the 1st, 2nd, and 4th dhyanas. And so those, it's on all. These 4 are the other 3 are on all 10 of these levels. Now we talk about these as antidotes for malice and so forth. So how are they antidotes? What are they like as antidotes? So they don't abandon. So it's explained that they're antidotes for malice, etc. So do the immeasurables actually discard the afflictions, you ask? The explanation of them as antidotes for malice and the others is through distinctions in power in terms of either suppressing or distancing. So when you do the meditations on the 4 immeasurables in the desire realm, what the meditations do is they decrease your hatred, malice, attachments, and so forth. They don't eliminate them entirely, but they decrease them. And they're very good at for decreasing your, for decreasing hatred and so forth, and malice and hostility. They're very effective at that, but they do not uproot it entirely. Now, the reason they don't uproot it entirely is that they actually are not exclusive. You can still have loving kindness and delusion at the same time. So because of that, they can't actually function as antidotes that will uproot the afflictions, as Dharmakirti says in his chapter on establishing validity from the commentary on validity. He says, since they are not exclusive of delusion, loving kindness, and so forth, do not destroy the faults completely. They don't get rid of them completely. But even though they don't eliminate the faults completely, they're still really useful and still important to do. And the reason for this is that when you have raging malice and raging hostility and raging dislike, and when you have a complete bias for other sentient beings, it's really hard to develop the qualities. So these are actually really important meditations for us to actually suppress or to decrease the faults of malice and hostility and so forth. So it's really important for us to meditate upon these as beings in desire. Now, whether this actually comes to the level of the samadhi of loving kindness or not is actually not important for us in the desire realm, because if we don't decrease our malice and so forth, we're never going to get to the levels of dhyana and so forth. So we need to meditate on them now, whether we're going to call them immeasurable or what, doesn't matter. We need to meditate on these qualities. And so it's so that's what they do for us in the desire realm. They suppress hostility and malice and so forth. The other thing that they do is that they are distancing antidotes. So this means that there's the antidote that kind of actually eliminates the thing, and then after that you need to get far away. It's like after you escape from prison, you got to run. You can't just stay there. If you stay there, there's the danger that, it's not so good. You got to run. So it's the same way when you're on the dhyanas. If you're on the dhyanas, you're not going to have any malice or hostility, because those are only in the desire realm. But you need to get further away from them. So that's why they're distancing antidotes on the 4 dhyanas. And they also help develop other qualities in our mind. So that is the 4 immeasurables, do not actually abandon. They aren't exclusive of ignorance, as they can't abandon. That's the Mahayana. Here, it also says, because they are pure actual practice, so they do not discard afflictions. And so what we say when they're pure actual practice, this means is that they are defiled virtue. They are not undefiled virtue. And the reason why they are not undefiled virtue is because they are not focusing, they're focusing on sentient beings on the relative level. They're not thinking of, they don't have the aspects of the 16 aspects of the 4 Noble Truths, so therefore they're not undefiled. But they are defiled virtue. They're also defiled virtue because they produce a karmic result. So they do not, the result of being reborn in the realm of Brahma, if you do them in the desire realm. So they're defiled virtue. So then because they're defiled virtue, as we discussed, was it yesterday or the day before, defiled virtuous jhanas do not discard afflictions. And also, they do not abandon because they focus only on sentient beings. If you're focusing on sentient beings, you're focusing on specific characteristics, but it's in the great exposition tradition, you have to focus on the general or universal characteristics of impermanence, suffering, and so forth in order to to abandon afflictions. So therefore, they're merely interested in attention. It's kind of like imagining and wishing and hoping. And attention here is that quality, is what we call yila chepa, manasakara in Sanskrit. It's actually not necessarily attention, it's more like mental work, contemplation. Here it's in the sense of contemplation. They're contemplation through kind of like interest and wishing and wanting something. So, and they arise in humans as far as their bodily support, because their clear mind and the power of familiarization produce them. They arise in humans, excluding those on unpleasant sound, and others do not produce them. So that is how they arise. And then there's a question about how they're possessed. Which ones do you have? So one must have the 3, it says. If one possesses one immeasurable, one must also, without a doubt, possess all of them. In other words, if you have immeasurable loving kindness? Do you necessarily also have immeasurable compassion, immeasurable joy, and immeasurable equanimity? And the answer is actually no. It is not definite that one will possess them all. But if you have any, however, if one possesses any of the three excluding joy, they also have the other two. That means, so if you have immeasurable loving kindness, you also have immeasurable compassion and immeasurable equanimity, but not necessarily immeasurable joy. So one must have the three. That would be loving kindness, loving kindness, compassion, and equanimity. Joy is not included. Why? Because joy is mental pleasure, so it is not possessed on the third or fourth jhana. So this is in terms of attainment. So when you attainment, in terms of having them, that's one thing. That means that you have that non-concurrent formation of attainment in your being. In terms of their manifestation, they are possessed individually because their aspects are exclusive of each other. So this means that, like, when you are looking at a sentient being and saying, may this being be happy, this is focusing on the being in a different way than when you're focusing on them being free of suffering. May they be free of suffering. That's a different focus, a different aspect. So therefore, they manifest individually. But if you've got one, if you have one of those three, then you must have the other three. And with the jhana, with the joy, then if you're on a level where you can experience joy, you also would have the joy. So this is the spot where the auto commentary talks about the. Let me just check. Right. This is the spot where the auto commentary speaks about the way you actually meditate upon the four immeasurables. And of course, there are many different explanations of this in many different ways of meditating on it. In general, it's very important for us to develop these qualities. So the basic way you do it, the specifics are different in every tradition. So the way it's described in the auto commentary is that when you settle down in your meditation, and then you think about a sentient being who's close to you. Actually, you kind of divide sentient beings up into groups. There's a group of people who you're close to. Then there are a group of people who are kind of in the middle. And then there are people, usually we say enemies, but I'm going to say antagonists. Those people who antagonize you, right? So the people who are close to you, even within the people who are close to you, you have people who are closer and the middling, the greater closer, lesser closer, middle closer, less closer, to use the Dharma, the way it's always described in the Dharma. So those who are very close, those who are moderately close, and those who are somewhat close. In the middle, you've got, again, different gradations of people who are some people who tend to be more close, and some people who tend to be in the middle, and some people who tend towards being antagonistic. And then among the people who are antagonistic, you've got the minor ones and the middling ones, and then the real hard ones. So you've got these 9 different gradations of people. You focus on the beings who are closest of close. So the Tibetan tradition, we almost always say mother. In the West, we have complexes about our parents, and also we sometimes have problems with our parents, and so sometimes it's difficult. So you can choose whoever works. Someone who's close to you, and you feel just gratitude for that person, and then you think, may that person be happy. And when you get this feeling like you when you get the feeling like you would be just totally delighted when that really closest of close people would have the same happiness as you have, or the same happiness as a Buddha, or as an Arhat, or a Bodhisattva. When you think about that and you have that really strong wish that these beings have that same happiness as a Buddha or an Arhat or a Bodhisattva, then at that point, you've got through that stage. It might take a while. And sometimes also, actually, you might have that for a moment. And so I think in terms of the actual practice, you'd want to do it so long, like this kind of sustaining it. Then you move to the next people. So this is, not just the closest of the close, but the people who are pretty close. So if the first one was like a parent, like your mother, or like an aunt, or an uncle, or someone who's just always really great to you, then the second level might be like close friends. You think about the people you're close friends with the same wish, may they be happy. Of course, there are different texts that you recite according in specific instructions, but then you have, so when you have the same feeling for them as you had for the closest of the close, then you have then that's a sign that you've trained in that stage. And again, I think it's probably not an issue of feeling that just like for like 30 seconds on one day. I think it's like having like a sustained feeling of that. And then when you move to the next one would be what? The people who are close but not so close. So these are, you can divide people into your own categories. And so then you just when you can do that for someone who's in that third category, then you again meditate to have the same feeling for them as you do for the people who are really close. Then you go through the same meditations with the people in the three different divisions of the neutral people, and then the three different versions of the antagonists, of your antagonists. And then when you've got to the point where you've got your own worst antagonist, the most dreadful person, and you have the same wish for them to be happy as you have for the person who's closest to you, then that is a sign that you have, and it's again sustained, not just temporary but sustained, then that's a sign that you've really completed that level. And then you move on to then going through meditating for everyone in your town, or if you're in a big city, everyone on your block. Even that's a lot of people. Maybe everyone in your apartment building, everyone on your block, everyone in the city. Usually we say everyone in your town, everyone in your county, everyone in your region, but larger and larger geographical units until you can get everyone in your country, then everyone in the world. Then you start thinking everyone in the east, everyone in the south, in the west, in the north, and then in the different directions, so you can do all the directions. So you can have the same wish for any sentient being to be as happy as you have the same wish as you have for your really closest of close people. And then, well, what do we say? Okay, so then there's the aspect of thinking about people saying, may you be happy, and so forth. Now, the other point about this is that you might think that there's like some sort of maybe this is not really seeing things truly, because you can't do everything to make everyone happy. And like, they're not going to be happy. You want them to be happy, but they're not going to be happy. So this is actually kind of diluted, isn't it? And because it's diluted, doesn't it therefore then become afflicted? So in responding to this kind of objection that some people must have made, Vasubandhu basically replies that actually it's because it's like saying, may they be happy. In grammatical terms, you'd say this is an optative mood. It's like saying, may they be happy. It's like not saying they are happy. If you're saying they are happy, that's different. But you're saying, may they be happy. May they be free of suffering. So you've got that wish. It's because it's a wish. You're developing a wish, but not actually. It's that wish is a virtuous wish. It's a virtuous intention. The wish to make it, the intention to make people happy, and so forth. And so therefore, it is not deluded. It's not saying that by merely wishing that all sentient beings be happy, that they're automatically going to be there in a snap of a finger. That's not how it works. But you're developing the wish to develop them. So it's not a deluded meditation. Now, the other aspect of these four immeasurables is that they are easier to develop if you they're easier to develop if you are actually able to see the qualities in other sentient beings. This is something that Vasubandhu also notes in the auto commentary. If you can see the quality of sentient beings, then it's going to be easier to develop them. If you're someone who just because of habit, look at people and see them in a bad light, or see their faults, then it's harder to develop these qualities. So what I think this means is that we've got to, when you look at other sentient beings, you need to actually look for their qualities instead of looking for their faults. This is a teaching that often comes up in the Tibetan tradition as well. For example, the 8th Karmapa Mikya Dorje wrote in one text that when you see qualities in a sentient, in another sentient being, then you should prostrate to that, then you should think of that quality as being like a Buddha. And you should prostrate it and feel great faith and devotion in it. We have to feel, so we have to look for the qualities in other sentient beings. It's the only way that we're going to develop our own qualities. Otherwise, if you're always looking at other people and saying, not good enough, no. And I think for a lot of us, our first and the easiest, most habitual response when you see another sentient being is to say, no, not good, not like me, not like mine, not like my group. And so we have to overcome that. And the way to do that is when you see other sentient beings, no matter how much of an antagonist they may be. It may be your most hated political enemy. We usually feel great antagonism for those hated political enemies. But we should look and see their qualities. See all sentient beings equally, no matter how horrible a leader they may be, or how much distrust we have of them. We need to actually look at them and all sentient beings with looking for their qualities, looking for what's good in other people. So we need to look at for what's good in other people, and this will help us develop the 4 immeasurables. And then developing the 4 immeasurables is kind of like the groundwork for developing bodhicitta. I mean, it's hard to develop bodhicitta, and of course I'm digressing into Mahayana speak here. If you actually want to develop bodhicitta, how can you have bodhicitta if you don't have equanimity, with the same wish for all sentient beings? How can you have a bodhicitta if you don't want to free them from suffering? How can you have bodhicitta if you don't want all sentient beings to be happy? So you need, these are like the basis. In many Mahayana texts, we talk about first developing equanimity, and then developing loving kindness. And out of loving kindness comes compassion. And once you have compassion, that's the cause from which you can develop bodhicitta. So we need to meditate upon these 4 immeasurables. And then even when you get into tantric Buddhism, if you're doing tantric practice, you absolutely have to have bodhicitta. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. And also the 4 immeasurables are often represented by different aspects of the deities or the mandalas in tantric meditation. So it's incredibly important for us, and no matter what level of Buddhism we're doing, to practice these 4 immeasurables. In a sense, even if we're going to be doing a meditation like Tonglen meditation, before you actually begin in Tonglen meditation, you have to have the wish that beings be happy. You have to have the wish that they be free of suffering. So in some sense, it's like there's, and it's not always taught like this, of course, but it often, there are instructions on the points of mind training that teach that you first develop loving kindness. Then you develop compassion. And then only once you have developed those do you meditate on the Tonglen meditations of exchanging yourself for others. So no matter what level of practice, these four immeasurables are important. In the Theravada tradition, they speak about how important they are for taming our minds, for calming us down, and for making our minds workable. And this is an incredible benefit that these 4 immeasurables give us, because they suppress the hatred and malice and hostility and so forth that then that create a lot of problems. And and also our attachments as the 4th one, overcoming our attachments. So no matter, so they're really important, and we can't we can't underestimate them. It's one of these practices that it's easy to look at and say, I understand it, I get it. And do a little bit of meditation to the point where you get somewhat of a warm and fuzzy feeling. But a warm and fuzzy feeling is just not enough. It's just not going to take us where we need to go. We need to bring it, make so it's more intense. And you know, it's not there's not necessarily any particular emotional content with any of them, although often there is an emotional content. It's not what you're looking for. What you're really looking for when you're meditating upon these is the attitude of, do you actually have the same wish for any sentient being to achieve happiness as you do for those people who are closest to you? when you look at sentient beings, I mean, neutral ones like the ants who crawl around on sidewalks, do you have the same wish for happiness for them? Do you have any wish for happiness for them? Are you even seeing them? So this is why it's really important for us to meditate upon these four immeasurables. They're really beneficial for us in all respects. So a lot of us, there have been several questions over the course of this course about people who've been asking, well, what about how do I deal with anger or this problem and so forth? And these are important questions. Well, one of the basic meditations that we can do to help us deal with these in our daily lives is these four immeasurables. And if we can develop them, they have great benefits. So they're really important, even if they are not necessarily antidotes that are going to bring us all the way to Buddhahood. They're the causes of those, or they're contributing factors. I guess the cause would be our own, from our Kaji perspective, our Buddha nature, our the innate qualities of our mind, the union of emptiness and compassion and so forth. So that might be the cause, but the condition is meditating upon the four immeasurables. So it's really important for us to put the effort into doing it, even if it's not intellectually stimulating, because it's simple. No matter what it is, even if you look at it as a lower meditation, lower meditations or lower level meditations are important, because if you don't develop the qualities that you gain through doing meditation such as this, then it's difficult to achieve any qualities through any quote-unquote higher meditations. Kala chakra, Mahamudra, Dzogchen. If you don't have compassion, you can't do any of them. And if you don't have loving kindness, you can't develop compassion. And if your loving kindness and compassion are biased, then it's not going to help anyone. And if you're jealous of other people, then it's not going to help anyone. So you've got to have all four of these immeasurables if we're going to get anywhere in our Dharma practice. So I've pontificated enough for today. And where are we at? Oh, lots of questions this morning. Let me see them, go through them in order. Some suggestions on how to upload audio files to YouTube or something. I'll take a look at that. Or if the questioner might maybe see, is it easy to do that? Then I'm happy to do it. Then do the question here about the four immeasurables is, do the four immeasurables result in the accumulation of merit, which progresses you on the path of Dharma, even though they are defiled virtues that produce karmic results and therefore not on the higher level of the noble ones? And the answer is absolutely. Definitely their accumulation of merit. We have to start out somewhere. We're not yet able to do the undefiled merit, so we have to start with defiled merit. We have to be generous. And if we don't have an understanding of emptiness, then that is, defiled, but we still have to do it. And we have to meditate on these four immeasurables and gather the accumulation of merit. For example, if we think about the stories of the Bodhisattva, who spent 3 uncountable eons as a ordinary being before achieving the noble paths in his final lifetime, his accumulations of merit over 3 uncountable lifetimes were all defiled, according to the Great Exposition. And so it's the same for us. We also need to do whatever we can to gather merit. Even if it's defiled, we shouldn't worry about it. Then there's also a question about how can we make offerings for these teachings? And of course, it's normal for people to make offerings at the end of teachings. If people manage to make offerings to me, I will probably actually end up giving the offering on to someone else. I'm so well taken care of where I am within the Trangu Monastery, whichever branch of Trangu Monastery I'm at. I'm always very well taken care of, and whenever else I am. So I personally have no need of money, and also I find that when I get money and I think of it as my own, it just promotes attachment, so I try to avoid it. So no need to try to give me money. But if you feel like you want to make a donation for receiving these teachings, actually making a donation to one of the Trungpa monasteries is essentially the same as making a donation to me, because I'm supported by the Trungpa monasteries. And if they don't have support, then I don't get support. So there's the Himalayan Children's Fund in the US, there is the Namo Buddha Foundation in Canada, there is the Pende Foundation in Europe, and I think there are also some foundations in Asia. They are all listed on the Rinpoche.com website. So if you feel like you must make a donation, then that is a good way to do it. If you give me money, I will thank you very much and put it in my little stash that I'm going to send off to someone who needs it when it seems the right time to do it. So, all right. So what do we do now? We're at, I think that's all the questions. So we will. Yeah, we will recite the dedication and aspiration prayers now. So please think to yourselves that we are that we're dedicating all the merit that we have accumulated by teaching and listening to the Dharma to the benefit of all sentient beings, and in order to bring them all to the ultimate state of happiness, the state of Buddhahood, as well as to free them from the temporary sufferings of samsara, birth, aging, sickness, and death, and in particular those sufferings that are affecting many people in the world right now, the sufferings of illness, destruction by fire, destruction by floods, and conflict and war, and so forth. So with this in mind, please recite these dedication prayers. Osanam de tam je se pani tobne nye peranam pam chete kegana chi balong chubai si pe tsole ro kunyo ro sho. By this merit may we attain omniscience, defeat the enemy, wrongdoing, and free all beings swiftly from the ocean of existence, churned by great waves of birth, age, sickness, and death. Chanchup samcho rinpoche make panam kejur chi chepa nyamba me baryang gong gongdu pelwar sho. Okay, thank you very much.